Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with co-host David Anderson. David, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great, thanks. How are you?
Good, thanks. Our listeners. So much to talk about, but what we thought we would cover is Chrissie and Martina, 1 hour and 37 minutes, the final set. Great documentary. Why don't you lead off with a couple things? And I've got lots of notes just on their records. It's amazing. Go ahead.
Well, it was walk through memory lane, watching it, and just that was such a beautiful era to me. That era of tennis, and it spanned quite a long time as the documentary showed. But I think that what carried through to me was a common denominator that you see with any kind of rivalry amongst the top players, in that they really look to the situation as a great challenge to learn more about themselves. And I think each player uses the other one to push them to higher levels. I think whether it's basketball and, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, or some of the great matchups that we've seen in tennis with Fed and Rafa, and then, those two pulling Djokovic in. And I think it's just a common denominator. And I think that coming back from the boys 16-18 nationals at Kalamazoo the other day, and I think that lesson alone could really serve a lot of the kids that are up there, because it seems like we're in a junior tennis world where kids don't tend to look at it that way, as Chrissie and Martina did, where they rose to the challenge and just got better. And that's how they caught each other and pushed each other.
No, thanks for that. Great to have the listeners chiming in. Let me say this, memory lane. I was not even in tennis when Chrissie Evert came on the scene. James Van Allen invented the tiebreaker in 1970. I'm 1 month older than Chris Evert. And my late mother, she was the jokester. She was the girl next door, Chrissie Evert, cute Chrissie Evert. I mean, I had nothing to do with tennis at that time. But I can remember my mother, she would do this, Christmas presents under the tree. And then I remember for several years, I would get a present from Chris Evert. Merry Christmas from Chris Evert. I mean, she was bigger than life. But let me go through this. Yeah, the 80-match rivalry, the 50-year friendship. Yeah, supporting each other through their battles with cancer. But it was really pegged as the girl next door, the communistic defector. But these Chris Evert records, I'll just run through it very quickly. But I think we need to get back to the tennis side. I think of Borg versus McEnroe, offense and defense, the contrasting styles, and how they did really bring the best out in each other. And before we got online, you mentioned that they lifted each other's level of play. This is back really when players weren't going down under to play the Australian Open. They didn't really go that often. But Chris Evert, 18 majors, 157 singles titles, 1,309 wins, 146 losses. It's 89.7. So she won almost 90% of her matches, that win rate. Clay, she was at 94.5. She won 125 matches in a row, 125 consecutive wins, and she only lost 8 sets during that. I mean, it's just amazing. With that, everybody hit the ball deep. Actually, someone we spent a lot of time with was a student and was on the staff along with his wife. It was Lisa Weiss and Guy Weinel, but they got married. Their daughter, Ashley, she became #1 junior in America. And I can remember when Ashley was training at Everett. Yeah, so I was born in 54. When were you born, Dave?
64. We're 10 years apart.
64. So, yeah, I would just, when Everett was 60, I would say, well, if you just hit down the middle, I'm sure she could still beat anybody, any gal there. Reached 52 of 56 slams, semifinals, 52 of 56. 56 slams, that's 14 years. Yeah, December 21st, 1954. 7 French, 6 U.S. Open, 3 Wimbledon, 2 Aussies. And Bud Collins, I should be able to rattle off how many Australian Opens she played. She at a major, she never lost in the first or second round. She only lost twice in the third round. Now she says, if I had it correct, that she won 2 majors in doubles, but Wikipedia says she won 3. Now you could go, I always tell people, it's a clip, 1987 mixed doubles, Kathy Rinaldi and Vince Van Patten. Vince Van Patten, that's his story. He was a top 10 junior in California. He was on this TV show every Sunday night, Apple's Way. Didn't play tennis between the ages of 16 and 21. Came back and he was in the top 50 in the world. He beat McEnroe during the 84 year that McEnroe was just unbeatable. If I have that right. We'll get our fact checker on that. Andres Barbosa. But they served and volleyed. If you go back, I think it was 1987. Jimmy Connors, Chris Evert playing, Kathy Rinaldi, Vince Van Patten. Rinaldi, I mean, she certainly, I would say, if you looked at her, she modeled the game after Everett. Born in Fort Lauderdale, Colette and Jimmy, the parents. Graduated high school 73, St. Thomas Aquinas High School. Jimmy was a professional coach. The brother Drew, I remember reading this. I later had some things to do with Drew being a teaching pro in Boca. Is Drew Everett was, said, well, no, I can beat Chrissie. He was at, I don't know, Sun Centennial, and she said, well, maybe not on clay. But yeah, Claire, she won the Orange Bowl. She played your way. She played at SMU. Our listeners, Dave's based out in Dallas at the Brookhaven Country Club. But yeah, Chrissie and Jeannie, we'll get through that. John, here's one thing about Everett. We'll get back to the records, but I've always said that many times, anytime I have a chance to tell people this. Chrissie Everett wins the U.S. Open, when she wins the Canadian Open, and she looks at the board of champions, past champions. Her father, Jimmy, had won it in 1947. She said, I never knew my father won this tournament. That's a great story for humility. She played her first pro event at 14. She beat Margaret Court at 15. I know you coaching Ashton Kruger, who recently was at the round of 16 at Wimbledon. I said, hey, you should have Ashton Kruger watch this tape. It's Chris Evert versus Margaret Court, 73 French Open. Amazing tennis. And she's labeled as a baseliner, but she certainly could come in and play a good volley. She skipped the French in 76, 77, 78. A lot of people don't know that. Tennis history is very complex, complicated, confusing. But there was just more money in world team tennis. There were contract athletes. It makes me think of Jimmy Connors. In 74, he wasn't allowed to play the French because he had played world team tennis. So he was deprived of the chance of winning the calendar Grand Slam. She won a major in 13 consecutive years between September of 71 and June of 83. She reached 34 semifinals or better, 32 double titles, won 8 Fed Cups. Now here's some interesting records. Virginia Wade, 40 wins, 6 losses. With Navratilova, which was a losing record at 37 wins, 43 losses. Goolagong won 13 times, but it was 26. Chrissie won 2 out of 3 matches, 26-13. Virginia Rozich, for the longest time she was agent, class act. Chrissie was 24-0. You talk about humility.
Wow.
You talk about humility. When Virginia Rozich is introduced as the French Open champion, she says, "Yeah, but there should be an asterisk next to it because Chris Evert didn't play that year." Sue Barker used to hand out the trophy at Wimbledon, and she won the French Open also when Chris Evert didn't play. 23-1. Betty Stova, 22-0. Rosie Casals, 22-1. Mandlikova, used to love to watch her play, 21-7. Winnie Turnbull, 20-1. Billie Jean King, 19-7 for Everett. Thus far, the only losing record is against Navratilova. But against Billie, she won the last 11 matches. And in those 11 matches, she only lost 2 sets. Shriver, who used to come to the net, it'd be a good matchup versus Chrissie. Net beats baseline. They were in the 78 U.S. Open final. Pam Shriver coming in with her green Prince racket. Carrie Melville Reed, 18-2. Maleva, 17-2. Elena Sukova, 17-2. Jaeger, 17-3. I'd like to mention Jaeger with her style, and she played in the Wimbledon final against Navratilova. We can talk about that. Diane Frumhold, 16-3. Olga Morozova, 15-0. Francois Durr. As you said, there were a lot of flashbacks. Francois Durr, 13-0. Every time I see Francois Durr, she hit a backhand with a forehand grip. She had a total palm-up serve. She looked like a 3-5 club lady. Two things on Francois Durr. Vic Braden used to always say, the way she hit her backhand, she could choke a bull with 2 fingers. It was just amazing how she was so inefficient on that side, but so effective. But she had a palm-up serve, and back in the day, people, they played 3 out of the 4 majors on grass and the wooden rackets. The pros, continental grips. Even the great Welby Van Horn, who's such a great junior coach and such a great system to start beginners, and a former top 10 player in the world. I remember being in the nursing home when he was in his 90s, and he regretted it. He changed kids from an Eastern grip to what he called a championship grip, which was almost continental. But the continental grippers had a tough time against Frankie Durr because their serve was so slow, and they were early. They were snapping that racket, that expression over the ball. Here's another losing record. Tracy Austin, 8-9. Mary Jo Fernandez, 7-0. Sabatini, 6-3. Here's one that's close, Everett's way. Nancy Ritchie. Great story. The brother and sister, San Angelo, Texas. But she was, when Chrissie was just coming up, Nancy Ritchie was so good from the baseline. It was 6-5. Actually, it makes me think of Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King, she played doubles with Nancy Ritchie. And Nancy used to like to come in from the baseline. So Billie Jean King, a great serve and volleyer, she stayed back. They won the Virginia Slims final, coming forward as a team. So the old Bradenism is 3 ways to play doubles: 2 up, 2 back, 1 up, 1 back. Worst way to play: 1 up, 1 back. Most universally played: 1 up, 1 back. Certainly you and I could talk about the Everett Academy and St. Andrews. I know you and I spent time in Boca. I spent a lot of time in Boca. All right, why don't you comment on that, and then I'll rattle off some thoughts on Navratilova. What comes to your mind hearing those numbers, those records?
Well, first of all, I feel like my 2-time North Dakota Closed Junior champion record pales in comparison to hers. It jokingly, but it's just mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. It's complete domination throughout the sport through multiple eras. It was interesting to hear the names that you rattled off, and those names spanned a lot. Those were a lot of years that were covered, different careers and different times and eras, and she literally dominated. And I think that when you think of her clay court dominance, I know that for many people, even in the sport, I think that automatically what comes to mind is Rafa. But I think her status on the clay is easy to get over. It's been overlooked in some. I think in so many ways, and it's just really mind-boggling. To hear it all like that, and I was just jotting down some things while you were doing that, and I had forgotten that she skipped the French for those years. There should be an asterisk by it, I guess, and for the players like Sue Barker and Rizici who won it, and because she was pretty much not a shoe-in, but as close as you can get. So incredible, beautiful stuff.
Just at the top of the list, Virginia Wade, who won Wimbledon 77. She I believe her father was a minister. She lived in South Africa for 7 years, so she got out of the British reign for a significant time of her formative years. But you can really get into the technique with grips. People coming in with a strong continental grip on both the forehand volley, backhand volley, and the down play. But I'm always telling juniors, you shouldn't have hopeful or wishful thinking. But it was someone just have a really solid Eastern grip, right smack in the middle. Just like a Steffi Graf. But when she came on the scene, she said, well, when I came up, no one had ground strokes. But there's so many things. If you look at the movement of Billie Jean King, they show her scrambling for some points. We can get into that. But, to me, having had the chance, I was around Billie Jean King as a spectator. In fact, I remember watching her coach Tim Mayett up in Chicago. Just different clinics. I don't really know Billie, but I don't think anyone's even close from the service line in. But of course, she played every major, singles, doubles, and mixed. Just amazing how well they played. And that's certainly a factor today that's gone away. But let me go on Martina, October 18th, 1956. She also number one for 7 years. A little bit longer at number one with 332 weeks versus Everett's 260. I think people thought of Martina at one point in her career. I know it was mean that the press Martuna, because she came over here and there's just so many things. It's revealed, she just depressed and defected. She's here alone and she put a lot of weight on. And I remember the press calling her Martuna, but Martina she became Martina, and she's only 5'8" to Everett's 5'6", but people just, I think, thought of her being much bigger because she's so muscular. Lefty, 167 singles titles, 177 doubles titles. I think it's 344 total titles, right? Yeah. 18 singles, same as Everett. 31 doubles, 10 mixed, 59 total majors. In 1983, I think that's when she lost to Kathleen Horvath. But she won 98.9% of her matches. I think it was 86-1, 74 match winning streak. Here's something that's interesting. I had a chance to watch Doris Hart play tennis and Margaret Court, but they're the only three that have career Grand Slams. In other words, singles, doubles, and mixed. They've won every event. Of course, in all fairness to players today, there's so much money in the singles, they don't really play the doubles. And just look what's going on with the mixed at this upcoming U.S. Open for the second time. This is interesting. Her last major is a 2006 U.S. Open with Bob Bryan. She was just like a month and a half shy of being 50. So by time, once she was 30 years old, she still went on, and she won her first major in 74, but she won, I think it's 30 majors of the 59 after she was 30. So she certainly had a long career. Defected in 75. She was 18. Now, I can say I certainly never lived communism, but I spent time in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, before the wall came down in 89. Many thoughts come to me with that experience. U.S. citizen in 81. 3 Australians, 2 French, 9 Wimbledon, 4 U.S. Open. 81 openly stated that she was gay and homosexual, and just talked about the media and marketing and so many tough things that she had to face besides the depth of Chris Evert's ground strokes. Stepfather was a coach, tennis coach. Her biological father died when she was very young, but he was a ski instructor. That's one thing about, Navratilova, the kids from Central and Northern Europe, is they can ski, skate, and play soccer. And, she was such an athlete. And, and Everett says that over and over again. Everett just was so mentally tough. Her grandmother was ranked as high as number 2 in the former Czechoslovakia. It reminds me of Lendl. Lendl's mother was number 2. Martina was a national champion at 15. She, was on the Fed Cup team of the U.S., 4-time winner, winning majors on grass, clay, and hard court in the same year. That says a lot about her game. Just a few more things. Wimbledon, she was in the final 9 straight years. 9 straight years. I think it was the number 9. She won 9 Wimbledons, too. I know I mentioned on the podcast Andy Fitzell, who started the podcast. He was with her someplace, it was a players' lounge or whatever, and talking to her. Because I'm always saying, can a tennis group name 9 players that could hit a one-handed underspin backhand approach shot since she retired? And I find that tennis groups are pretty hard-pressed to do that. She was in the U.S. Open 5 times in a row. The French, 5 of 6. Back to Everett. With Everett, she was 10-5 on grass, 9-7 on hard, 3-11 on clay. Her 344 titles compared to Graf at 118, but again, Graf was predominantly just playing singles. She equaled Billie Jean King's Wimbledon title of 20 in a row. Everett made $9 million, so now the career earnings were, Martina was at 21. There's a long list of coaches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Tim Gullickson wasn't listed. Mike Estep, I remember listening to Mike Estep at a conference.
Yeah, I was there.
Is that right? Yes. Coaching Martina.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, why don't you say a few things about Martina? And I've just got some.
Well, I remember the conference. A side note on the conference, because we were there and Mike Estep was nearing the end of his speech or his speaking, and he said he felt like in women's tennis, and I'm quoting him, this is not he said it really simply came down to who was going to choke less, and there were several people in the audience that really responded strongly at him for that. I'll never forget that. But
could have helped him out with my. I'm always sharing the Arthur Ashe quote.
Yeah, you were there. Yeah, I was sitting right beside you. I remember it was at the DPTA convention.
I should have raised my hand and said, Arthur Ashe, everybody chokes. The person who chokes the least wins. I didn't know that till I spent all the time. I know you spent time with him as well. The late Jim Lair is that his competitive circle, TACC, is choking's a positive.
Yeah.
I think in Sampras's book, there's a big difference between choking and freezing. Choking means you're in the arena, you're competing. And everybody gets nervous. How you just deal with it. Anything else on Martina?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of respect for the process that she went through. One of the quotes in the documentary that, it was just a statement really at the end of it. And it I think in how people were viewed, and it talked about how Chris Evert really came onto the scene already heavily armored in terms of who she was, and guarded and armored in terms of, hiding herself, protecting herself. And then she gradually in her lifetime now has, peeled off the armor. And they were speaking about how Martina came into the world, the tennis world, vulnerable, and then piece by piece started applying the armor. And now their lives have kind of intersected. And, when I think of Martina, I remember vividly watching and seeing her not in the best place emotionally and physically and all that. And then, the courage that she had to really transform her mind and her body. And, I think I think of Lendl in that same way. I think they were kind of catalysts in the whole thing that we see now, where people have devoted so much time to the off court and to the physicality and the mental, emotional. I think I think of those two players, and Martina in particular.
With Martina, John Niednagel, Brain Typing, you go back to previous issues of our previous episodes, had Martina as an ISTP. Of course, when people progress, they get older. It's just like John McEnroe, ISTP, and people think, geez, so extroverted. Vic was talking to his mom one time, and she said, no, John is a flaming introvert. But you put a microphone in someone, they have to be an extrovert. They got to speak up. So I think people might think of Martina as an E, but John Niednagel, ISTP, where Chrissie's an ISTP. The difference between that P and the J is that Chris Evert, this is very common in junior tennis, is young kids will find that baseline wins, and they really don't branch out, and they just stay on that baseline. But again, go back and watch Chris Evert play. She could come in, and she started coming more towards the end to, she said how she was very proud of she came back and won majors against Martina after Martina was dominating. But she could volley. And then World Team Tennis, as a marquee player, she was playing doubles. Yeah, the show opens up with Johnny Carson. So the young people today, who's Johnny Carson? That's like the first image. I thought that was pretty clever. It's like, wow, that's how far back it goes. Johnny Carson, that comes to my mind, is that at one time McEnroe bought his house, and part of the arrangement was he had to give Johnny Carson 3 lessons. of course, if people watch Johnny Carson, they know that he's certainly back in the day, everybody was smoking cigarettes. So I don't think his cardio was too good. So McEnroe went in with the idea as a young kid, I'm just going to tire him out so this lesson won't be very long. So Johnny, he made the comment, he goes, I figured that out. I kept sitting down. He goes, I didn't want him to just totally knock me out, so I couldn't take the lesson. But he negotiated 3 lessons for McEnroe. Johnny went from, at the end of his monologue, so for the young people, he, the talk show host in America, just have to Google him. And so go to YouTube. He changed, he became a tennis fanatic. He used to, at the end of his monologue, he would shadow swing or golf swing. But he changed it to a tennis swing. I can remember, this gets away from Martina and Chrissie, but certainly, they definitely have a connection to Jimmy Connors, where Chrissie was engaged to him. And then I just think of, you can get on YouTube and you can watch Jimmy Connors playing Martina, where, she can hit into the alleys. And there's a lot of fun stories about that, where I think Jimmy wins 6-3, 6-3, but he got down, and Bobby Riggs had bet so much money that he left. He couldn't take it. So Jimmy said, hey, he just kept going deep down the middle, and because they'd bet on the spread and what have you. But so anyway, when Jimmy Connors came on the scene, he beats Rosewall in 74, both Wimbledon and the U.S. Open. And I think this was fabricated. Bill Reardon, his agent, said that Jimmy said, get me Laver. But it was all hype, and it came out later. It wasn't winner take all, but he was at Caesar's Palace, and everybody loved Laver. And Johnny Carson was cheering for Laver. And it was picked up on national TV, that word that penetrates glass. And so brass Jimmy Connors calls. Of course, Carson loved it, Jimmy Connors called Carson, U-R-N, that word that begins with A, that penetrates glass. So anyway, that was, nostalgic for me. Just the beginning. Just to see a tab. I know my sister, I think back in the day, she thought she was drinking a healthy drink, but the pink, instead of Pepsi or Coca-Cola, it was in a pink can.
Yeah.
So many images.
I remember it well.
So many images from the 70s. Mary Carrillo's on in the beginning. She drops an F-bomb, which, okay, that's all right. But, I don't know why to do that, because kids should really be watching this and try to keep things I don't want to be a softie. I think that kids need to hear a little bit of the locker room lingo, a little profanity. But here's something to digress again, is that Carrillo, she's in the news. She's going to be inducted into the Tennis Hall of Fame with Roger. And she's talking about Novak, and she said it in a negative way, but then she bounced back and said all these positive things about him. She goes, he's such a taut player. Like it's a bad thing. I guess as a journalist now, and she did play, but as a journalist, maybe looking for things to be a little bit too flamboyant. But Annie Mills went on, she married John Lloyd first. And she married Andy Mills. She went from the tennis player to the skier, but then married a golfer, Greg Norman. But said now they're trying to save each other. Don't want to take anything away from people who haven't watched it, but I think that was a powerful comment. I'll tell you one thing about John Lloyd, and you can comment. One time at Holiday Park, rightfully so, now it's named Jimmy Everett. So I'm there, and I really got into tennis full time, just shy of being 20, so I'm 19 years old. And what did I know as a beginner? I've been teaching tennis for over 50 years, but I was a beginner. But I remember watching up in the stands where Chrissie, John Lloyd, he couldn't come to the net. He's serving underhand, and they just, on the clay, you can just draw a line inside the clay. And she was doing A-OK in that drill. It's just clever to be creative. Here's a girl who just hits so deep, doesn't miss. And I think that's where a man, so many times, or even in junior tennis, brawn versus brain. Many times an 18-year-old is playing a 14-year-old, especially in the boys. The 14-year-old, the 14-year-old's a better player, but the 18-year-old's just going to manpower and slap, especially on our American hard courts, slapping balls around. And then the 18-year-old's not clever enough to say, well, I'm going to drop it down a gear and beat this guy with skills. I'm going to keep the ball in play, center the ball, play an approach shot, come in and just angle off volleys.
Well, right along those lines, I don't know when it was within the last month, Martina, I came across something where she was making a comment saying that she wishes that we could go back to wood rackets primarily because she thinks people would start emphasizing technique and tactics more, because she thinks that we've lost our way with that. And, we've talked about it many times, and, it certainly would be a good way for people to be introduced into the sport of tennis from a young age on. Variations in sizes of the racket maybe, but to have wood rackets and the technique would certainly be put at a premium much more. But that was within the last few weeks I came across her making that comment. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, our podcast, Tennis Sangren, University of Tennessee kid. I heard him say that, if you were the commissioner, he was asked, if you're the commissioner of tennis for a day, what would you do? And he said, bring back wooden rackets. Pete Sampras was asked if his son Christian played tennis, what would you do? He said, make him play with a wooden racket till he was 13. So the listeners, find a garage sale, find wooden rackets. Now, at one point, back in the 80s, you and I, we've been at Tyler Junior College together, Tennis Tech, a program for tennis teachers. I used to buy every year 100 wooden rackets, and they only cost $5 each, because we had to teach people to string rackets. We had to have the rackets for PE students. And yeah, find wooden rackets. Have your kids play with wooden rackets. No, bring the tennis back to tennis. It's boom, boom, and more boom.
Yeah.
Speaking of the boom, the tennis boom, Chris Evert, people give Jimmy Connors, like he was the Muhammad Ali of tennis. He was, they came along together, then Borg, and then McEnroe. I think Joel Trucker, if I get it right, I'm guessing, but Connors was Elvis. Actually, when Elvis died, Jimmy Connors said, because Elvis was the king, and when Elvis died, Jimmy Connors said, there's only a few of us left. So I think that he had Jimmy as Elvis, and then he had the Beatlemania, Borg at Wimbledon. He was like the Beatles. And then McEnroe comes along, and he was the Rolling Stones. But yeah, there's so much personality back in those days. But James Van Allen, he invented the tiebreaker in 1970, so that really put next door Chris Evert, the teenage heartthrob on everybody's mind, because now tennis was on TV. Before that, I'm a product of the tennis boom. Everybody in America, it was the biggest thing going, is play tennis. When I was really young, I thought a tennis court was for street hockey. So then there's my story is I was going off to an expensive prep school, and my parents, I went to the mountains to be a dishwasher, and outside of my cabin were tennis courts. And then I go to this prep school, and outside my dorm were tennis courts. And everybody was playing. But yeah, Everett, she had so much to do with the tennis boom. Because, she was winning everything. And she was so marketable and loved. It was just, the media attention was phenomenal. Here's a few things that come to mind. Billie Jean King, she's on the documentary so many times. Randy Muffet, he played baseball. Father was a fireman, their mother was a seamstress, Long Beach. Weren't for money. I do a drill all the time. I was up in Toronto last week, and I did it. The kids love it. I do the shortstop drill. Call it the Billie Jean King shortstop drill. That's what I really liked about the documentary. It just took you back in time, all these reminders. So I stand up by the net post, and I, like a baseball coach, just with a fungal bat hitting groundies. And the kids have to catch it. You can do it where they have to catch it and throw it over the net. If they don't catch it, they're out. They don't throw it over the net, they're out. And it's fun. It's amazing how many kids, I don't want to be negative, doom and gloom, but they just can't catch. They don't play catch anymore. I never really liked baseball. And because I really didn't like baseball, I know some kids I grew up with now say, we never practiced batting. But the reason I had a pretty good club is I was always playing street hockey, and I always wanted to be the goalie. But with that, Billie Jean King was a great shortstop. She was such an athlete. You just think, okay, a younger brother, major leaguer. But the people should look at the segment of her moving her feet. I just don't think that there's enough appreciation for the players from the past. I say it all the time in this podcast is I grew up in hockey and no one would even utter the thought that Bobby Orr couldn't play in today's game. With Billie Jean King she went all the way to Australia to take lessons from Mervyn Rose. Wasn't to play. She went down to work on her forehand. And she came back and told everybody her forehand was great. Then after she retired, she said, my forehand was still dodgy. But from the service line in, she was so, so good. But I think just to watch that, there's a scene of her chasing points down. And the mobility is amazing. The chance, the influence that the Aussie, really Harry Hopman had on people doing kangaroo jumps.
Yeah, she was flying around the court. It reminded me of the WCT epic final with Rosewall and Laver. I think that's another must-watch for people to appreciate the speed and the athleticism of those guys. They were still unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. That was I had a chance to watch the WCT finals. It's called Moody, right? Moody Coliseum at SMU?
Yeah, Moody, yeah.
Do they have a new stadium now, or is that still...
SMU? Yeah, I bet they do. Yeah, I don't get out of this area much, but I have been down to the tennis. But I think we even went there to watch Sampras and Roddick exhibition one time, or an Andy Roddick and someone, Marty Fish maybe.
No, I have a photo. I have a photo you gave me. My son Connor was a ball kid. I believe that's. Roddick is in the picture, and my son's. Like 13 years old.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. Mm-hmm.
But Lamar Hunt, he loved tennis, big oil tycoon. But, the WCT finals were, people just need to go back, whether it's Everett and Navratilova. But to watch Rosewall and Laver. I remember when Larry Gottfried was coming up, and he played very similar to Everett in my mind. I think he went out on the pro circuit a little bit too early, but he did really well. But it was like Van Winitsky was this other junior. Could look like he was copying Laver, and Godfrey they were both 1 and 2 in America at one point. McEnroe was in that mix as well. Yeah, they showed World Team Tennis, the colored court. I think juniors will look at that and say, what is that? Billie Jean King has tried so many things to make team tennis go. That would be amazing if we had, look at what we just experienced watching the World Cup. There were so few two-handers. If you look at it closely, so when Chrissie would play, she'd get her first serve in and she would throw the ball. She would go up the line with 2 balls in her hand and she would throw the ball backwards. And then that was considered a distraction. And then they had to find a way to use a pocket or a ball holder. But yeah, Chrissie Evert. Because Connor's born in 1952, Everett in 54, Borg in 56. And then so the three of them, the two-handed backhand, they weren't the first, but because they were at the top and then the tiebreaker and tennis on TV. Sets used to go like 22-20, 16-14. So tennis couldn't be packaged. But then everybody was hitting. I remember even Vic back in the day, or Welby, they weren't teaching two-handers. Dennis Vandermeer, who had so much to do with Billie Jean King and Margaret Court. But I remember Welby Van Horn, 3/8 system of balance, high, low, high, on balance. He used to hand out, they had the 8 to 10 frame sequence in tennis magazines, but it was Everett. He goes, look at this, it's a left-handed forehand. But he figured it out quickly. Prague. I was in Prague before the wall came down. As I said earlier, I felt communism, but I didn't live communism. But I just remember buying some fruit in a store, these old apples that would have been discarded in the U.S. And then I realized there's no fruit in the entire store. I got a lot of positive feedback from your staff member, Igor. Tell me his last name again. I've met him once.
Yeah, Igor Shestakov.
Yeah, so people need to listen to that episode. Amazing. But
yeah, he's quite a guy.
But I was saying, watch the movie Moscow on the Hudson. I just had this great conversation with his father. His son is ranked, he's like next year when all the 11-year-olds become 12-year-olds, or on paper he would be the number one kid. Very, very good. I think he's an ISTP. He's got a great mind, great brain for tennis, and relaxed and competitive at the same time. But he took him to Spain for 2 weeks, and just said, "Tell me all about it." And he realizes that he was in a great program. The heat, how hard they worked, the running some more. But I said, no, you just need to add that to the science. You got to stay with the tennis math, but you have to add that. I remember going to the Sparta Club, and I was told I couldn't go upstairs, but I went upstairs anyway. It wasn't like I was a brash American. It's like, no, I'll sneak up there. I want to see what's up there. It was a banquet hall, but it was all these photos, from Lendl to Tomas Schmid, and you just, seeing a young Navratilova, Manlikova, amazing, the tennis players. But I remember you had to go and you had to exchange some U.S. dollars for the Czech currency at the time, and all the banks were all the taxis, they were the banks. My oldest brother spent a lot of time recruiting, behind the former Iron Curtain. I was told when I was in Czechoslovakia, just have as many tennis balls as you can have, because it was like gold, giving, taxi drivers helping you out or tennis coaches helping you out, just give them a can of new balls. But the only thing you could buy, there was just nothing in the stores. The only thing you could buy was, and they were telling you there was, what would I know about crystal? I remember playing in Ireland and winning a Waterford crystal bowl. I didn't even know what it was till the lady on the airplane said, "Let me see that bowl." And anyway, so I bought this crystal. Like, why would I buy crystal? And then when you left the airport, they told you that you couldn't take the crystal. It's like, okay, what a con this is. So buy the crystal. And then there was a sign, back then, with your shock to Americans, that you go to the airport and people are carrying machine guns. It's like, whoa, okay. It's like I remember going through, East Germany, in West Germany, going to East Germany, and it was like West Germany is very colorful and this and that, and then East German, a whole different train crew comes on, and then, they come into your compartment where you're sitting, and, one soldier's got a machine gun and the other one's holding a German Shepherd. I mean, you can't make it up. They want your pass bitter, they want your passport. But anyway, so I go around this thing, the sign is, says not allowed. But I want to see what's behind there. It's like conference table after conference table, just lined up with crystal. Just table after table lined up with crystal. And they were just saying, okay, well, these dumb visitors will take their money on the way in. There's nothing to buy. We got to find a con. And it wasn't really the people. It was the government. It was the government.
Wow.
What comes to your mind from that documentary?
Well, the documentary or the crystal story, I didn't know that. That was interesting. That's actually pretty clever. Yeah, and you referenced that particular era. We had this incredible matchup. These matchups that have kind of gone away since maybe Pete and Andre Rafter, those guys were in the scene. On the women's side, maybe Barty was the last remaining kind of player like that, and I love the contrast. I mean, I thinking back to when I was younger, watching it, and Ward McEnroe and the Martina and Chrissie matchups were just something we don't get to see enough of anymore. I think you've already hit on it. I mean, the powers that be could really learn a lot how to get. To me, that's a more exciting matchup from a viewership perspective, and I think that court surfaces that those guys were on back then were radically different than they are now. And I think it just bred for a little bit of not having these clones on each side of the net just banging. I know the game's changed. I know the equipment's changed. I know string, all of that. But I think slight modifications in the surfaces of the courts could help the game a lot. And I hope they're looking at it at the higher levels, the people that make those kind of decisions, because that was fun to watch those guys. Even in the documentary, it was just like, I mean, it put, for those of us that lived through it, it put you in a very special place.
To say, well, one has a crystal ball, the late Nick Baltieri, no one in my mind met more families that wanted their kid to become a great player. And Nick, more from character. Nick was so funny. The Italians, of course, the Italians are doing quite well now. Oh, the Italians, they love their kids too much. And he was Italian. But to put a crystal ball on it, I mean, we have 2 10-year-old boys here right now, and they need to rebuild their game. They've been playing maybe 3-5 years. They need to rebuild their game. The light at the end of the tunnel is coming right at them. But it's like if a kid was a basketball player, I just want a scrimmage coach. And I spent a lot of time, looking through the gym window here, and the coach's son. There's 4 teams. 2 teams on the men's side, 2 teams on the women's side, and the coach of the men's, his kids. You got 2 kids that are always in there. They're working on skills. I mean, I've seen them play, but they're working on skills. Let's talk about the wall at the Sparta, not Spartak. Spartak is Moscow, but Sparta is Prague.
Yeah.
There was one tennis court. It was genius. They had a mini tennis court in the middle, and they had the backboard on each end. There's a great film of, Novak Djokovic. He's just talking about the wall he used to hit on. There's a photo of Federer, a very extroverted guy from what people say, and he lived on the backboard. You got to live on the backboard. With what Igor said, the backboard was my babysitter. What a great line.
Yeah.
We have these portable backboards. It's the first order of business I came here is I donated money to the college and bought backboards, but the kids don't use them. It's like, hey, you could hit 40 balls in a minute. 40 balls in a minute. I mean, hungry dog hunts best. People don't use those backboards. They get them, and it's kind of like a stationary bicycle becomes a clothes rack. But, Navratilova says she started playing at 5, cut off wooden racket, and just hitting the backboard, over and over again. With Nastasi, I think of Nastasi calling Jan Kodish, when we talk about Czech tennis, I think Andy Roddick, I mean, obviously, the voice of American tennis right now. When the gal who won Wimbledon, help me out, the Czech player.
Noskova.
Yeah, so she goes up the stairs, and Kodish is the first one there. But Andy's, his age is at, certainly he knows the name Kodish, but the Russians came in, and it was, martial law taking over Czechoslovakia. But through that, they fought, kind of like the Polish people fought for the Catholic religion. The Czechs, I mean, they fought for many things, but tennis was one of them because it wasn't an Olympic sport. But anyway, Nastasi, he used to call Kodish the Russian. And, obviously he didn't mean anything, but that was just his sense of humor. I think it were, Navratilova said, she's 18 years old in this country by herself, learning English by watching I Love Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
I Love Lucy. There's a great scene in the movie, I know Andy Fitzell's a movie buff, Crocodile Dundee. I probably saw that movie with you when it first came out.
Yeah.
So
I remember it.
Crocodile D comes out, and he turns the TV on, and before he turns it on, he goes, I haven't watched TV in 20 years. And what pops up on the screen is I Love Lucy show. And he goes, yeah, same thing. Hasn't changed a bit.
Yeah.
Your turn. What else on that? I've got a couple more notes here. I could talk all day on that movie.
Well, I think that the perception of, that you have a lot of time. I mean, the documentary, to see Chris and Martina and, talking about their bucket list thing and at the end and, it's worth watching, even if we throw a few spoilers in, but, and they're just their journey and the way that you could really feel it. I felt, I at least from my perspective, I felt like Chris was doing a lot more introspection on her life and the time that she has. And I think that they look back and the relationship that they went through, the way it just went up and down, and hearing how Nancy Lieberman, who I've had the privilege to meet, basically said to Martina, "You're done. That's not your friend any longer." And then to see them come back years later and rekindle a friendship that they really had at the beginning, but Martina basically just severed her ties with it at the advice of her coach in order to become, number one and conquer the world of tennis. I just find that stuff fascinating because, we're in this era of coaching where I swear, all I do is just try to get people to manage their 1,440 minutes better. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to value those minutes in the way that they need to. And, those guys, Chris, Martina, there's just such a mission in everything they do. And now to see them at the twilight of their life and, both having faced major adversity with cancer and how they value time. And I don't know. I'm a big believer in those 1,440 minutes and using them well. And the sooner we get people to utilize them well, I think the better it is. And so that's what really resonated with me, just the value of time in general.
The young kids listening, that's how many minutes in a day. With, like for myself, I didn't learn tennis through osmosis. I certainly had a background in sports, but to be 19 years old, one thing wasn't really covered much was Martina's sister, but Chrissie Evert, her family, being, first of all, living in the States, but a family of 5, devout Catholic, parents and Catholic school. I know Drew, he played at Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
To get our fact checker on this, John Everett played at Alabama. I remember I took tennis lessons from Ed Foster. And I really enjoyed my time with Ed Foster. But again, I was 19 years old, and I was just reading books and watching people and asking, question after question. But I can remember warming John Everett up at a tournament in the old Delray Beach Tennis Center. It's nothing like it is now. And Ed's kids, Tommy, he played at Georgia. I think Tracy played at Virginia. But they were both among the best players in the country. But I was just, had a chance to watch Colette Everett. But, you see her on TV all the time because she travels quite a bit with Chrissie. Not all the time, but certainly enough where she was in the public eye. Everybody in tennis would know who Colette Lewis was because, your daughter's on TV playing all these majors. But as the family with all 5 kids, and I really think that the parents, they need to find a way. I think need to find a way to help all 5 kids. Claire has a very impressive resume, but when she's interviewed, she always says, well, she won the Orange Bowl when she was 12, and she played at SMU. But such an impressive background with the family. But to get to be parenting 5 tennis kids. Of course, Jimmy was a teaching pro. There were some positives to that, but it was certainly a lifestyle. But, they went, Chris Evert, she's, 16 years old, winning the U.S. Open, and she's going back to high school.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much normalcy compared, even though her life obviously was not that normal, but, hey, she's 16, she's going back to high school. You've got kids now that are 6 and aren't even thinking about going to school because, they need to practice more.
Yeah.
I do think it's the hamster wheel and people are going too fast and they're going in circles, and tennis parents, they're going down the road for the first time, the very first time. Have you ever raised an athlete? Were you an athlete? How new are you to tennis? I'll just keep going here. I'll have you chime back.
Let me ask you one question on. So, with Claire Everett, I would argue she was a little more athletic. Would you agree with that than Chris?
I didn't see her enough. I do remember spending 3 days with Jimmy Everett, and it was, during the day, I watched her take lessons. and someone who you'd remember, she was playing Vic Diamond. Vic Diamond set it up for me.
Yeah.
And, became a very good senior player, high school coach, somebody really passionate about tennis. And I just remember Claire in a tiebreaker missing a first serve. And Jimmy was such a classy, soft-spoken gentleman. He was just over and over again saying, it's a tiebreaker, you get your first serve in. It was 12 and under tennis. So, there is a lot to be said about you want to teach people an all-court game, but you got to teach people to win at the same time. So, get that first serve in, go to the body. Most kids open up. Most right-handers are hitting their first serve wide to another right-hander in the deuce court. And now the kids over there with the Babolat with the Western grip, and they're just it's home run derby. I mean, it's just a nightmare. And unfortunately, I come back to that all the time. So it was Dave Secker, who's a very successful coach at NC State. He's talking to Chad Berryhill, who's at Embry-Riddle. And Chad's won a couple national championships, and he meets Secker, and they just greet each other and go, oh, Smith, use my name third person. And Berryhill goes, he ruined it for you? And he goes, oh, you don't get along with Smith anymore? He goes, no, you just ruined it for me because I can never watch tennis and enjoy it. If you really study tennis, it's hard to enjoy it. If you're just a pure spectator. But, I know years ago when just watching like the Everett family, being at a tournament going, okay, I was kind of pinching myself is that, I'm from the snowbanks of upstate New York, and I was not too long ago, playing college hockey, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to make a living doing that, operation on my ankle. It's like, hey, my brother was studying hockey, I'm going to start studying tennis. Because I just felt like, there's a side to really digress. When I went for this hockey team, all the jerseys were already ordered for the incoming freshman Canadians. And fair enough, the Canadian kids went to grade 13 back then, and socialistic government, maybe they had more ice time, but Americans, even Canadians who came down to play Canadian hockey, they were never really given a look. But I just felt like, wait, I can get in tennis and it can be on my own terms, and it was really appealing. I just, through one experience hitchhiking, Dave Eddy's still going strong. He invented the ball tube. Great guy, great player from Nebraska. And but it wasn't until I met Dave Eddy, then I actually saw a tennis club and said, wow, this is actually an industry. Because, I just wanted to study hockey. And it's like, okay, at that time I wasn't thinking. Maybe I could have gone in that direction, but it just wasn't on my mind. Okay, I'll become a hockey coach. Yeah, I can ramble on. What do you got? Your turn.
Well, I think you brought up a couple of interesting points on, the two-hander. And how, there certainly were players that came into the sport prior to Connors, Borg, Chrissie, and that. But as you mentioned, the television kind of brought it more to the forefront. But you want to elaborate a little bit on also not just the two-hander versus the one-hander, even in the women's game, but the style of play, because, it was a predominantly serve and volley going forward. And Chris kind of shifted the gears on the whole thing, with the exception of a few players for sure. But
yeah, let me say this about the one-hander. You think offense versus defense, where Chrissie was more the counter-attacker, but she could attack, and Navratilova was just all attack. But at the same time, no, give her credit. She won the French. She can defend. But let's bring back Justine Henin. Come on. Mm-hmm. That's David versus Goliath, and her going toe-to-toe with Serena. People have short memories in tennis. And again, Einstein, if you don't understand the history of your subject, you don't understand your subject. With, people, I know Darren Cahill said, you'd be crazy to play a one-handed backhand now. But if you want to play one-handed, it's like Justine Henin would say, you can play one-handed, but you can lose a lot. I know my son Connor benefited from being at your place, and he ended up being the number 2 junior in the U.S. Even though that's not totally accurate because some kids would be not playing juniors, but he was a pretty good junior player, won a lot of matches, and he changed to a two-hander. And, the one-hander is, it's certainly, you could say, more versatile, but look at Wielander is that, he had a two-hander, but he became versatile because he started adding that one-handed backhand approach. Yeah, the two-hander, it's amazing today. Most kids have a better backhand than they do have a forehand, but they never hit their backhand. And the reason is they're always hitting their forehand. And the reason they're always hitting their forehand is this nonsense about serve +1, the first 4 shots. But the reason they're running around their backhand hitting the forehand is they cannot hit a volley. They cannot hit an overhead. And they have no instincts, and they've played years and years the wrong way. And no, I think it's cyclical. I do think that tennis education, that's why we're trying to do these podcasts, is slow down, mom and dad. The juniors, slow down and learn how to play the game. And learn how to play the game well.
Yeah. What you just said, I witnessed on the majority of the courts I watched up at Kalamazoo. I mean, by far, I can tell you that I watched so many of the players up there running around their strength to really hit what they perceived as their strength, but it was really their weaker side. And yeah, it is hard to watch it. Just approach shot after approach shot that was just passed up.
Yeah,
and if it was, it's hard. It's very difficult to watch because it is the players are getting shortchanged, but everybody's doing it, so everybody's doing it.
No, I was at Kalamazoo, and I'm up in the stands, Stowe Stadium, with 5 or 6 people I train to teach tennis. And again, it's Stowe. They're not over at Western Michigan playing the Consolation. They're playing at Stowe. They're still in the main draw. And, don't throw stones from your father. Don't throw stones. You live in a glass house. So there were some negative comments being made. And the next thing, the definition of comedy, tragedy with time. So the guys are laughing how these kids are playing. I go, hey, well, first of all, hats off to their family. They're at nationals. They're knocking on the door, round of 16, round of 8. But they're laughing because the tennis is so bad. And I hate to say that, but it's like, whoa, the ball's floating up there like a wounded duck, and the kid runs backwards. And, that's with, TV today. Raven Clausen on our podcast said, no, I wouldn't want to be a commentator because you just edify. Too many of them, too many TV commentators, they're just sucking up to the pros. And if you look at them, a lot of times they have access to the pros, and the TV commentators get coaching jobs. I mean, it's just, it is what it is. Let me jump ahead. I got this down. I know timetable, our listeners. So I was told that if we have a 3-hour podcast, you can knock it off with 1% of your week. But Andy Brandy, I spent a lot of time with Andy Brandy and his brother Joe. Not as much with Joe, but with All American Sports, I meet those two gentlemen, the late Andy Brandy, and it was like, wow, these guys know a lot about tennis. I'd been tennis for like 5 years. But anyway, one day I'm with some kids. It's been called a number of different things, but the Lipton, the Erickson. But I'm down in Miami. Okay, we're going to go down. We're watching 2 days of tennis, crash at a hotel. And I'm not going to watch matches. I mean, that's what you can watch on TV. And, they're all excited to watch matches. So I find Brandy, and I go, Brandy, I'm with you. And he was working with Lisa Raymond and Martina Navratilova. And I, can do that. I'm just going to be off the side. You won't even know I'm here. And I'm just going to listen to every word. And, it's fun to be around that, but it's kind of like, you told me you just at Wimbledon is, I'm more comfortable or more in my place, or I think more skillful to be coaching young kids. Try to get kids right on the right track. But this that day, it's just interesting, a lot of discussion. It's that the parents need to realize that the big time coaching, Lisa Raymond, I was up in Canada, I was coaching a girl who plays she's transferring from Georgia Tech to the University of Florida, great kid and big athlete. Miran Mann helped her a great deal with her game. Another one of our longtime students, associates. And, I just can't help myself. I say, hey, over here, I have all the juniors. I say, this girl plays at the University of Florida. It is big time. I used to go there on like a yearly basis, taking kids from Tampa to go watch college tennis. And you go to the swamp, and I remember telling a kid from Dusseldorf, hey, we're going to go to Florida. We're going to the University of Florida. And they've got a stadium that's bigger than any stadium in Dusseldorf. And the German's saying, no way, no way. We go there, and he's just shocked. Anyway, I said that, University of Florida women, they should just watch Lisa Raymond play doubles. I mean, she was so good. I mean, she played there for a couple of years. Actually, with Lisa Raymond, I spent 2 days traveling with Andy Brandy. I went to matches up in Utah, BYU, University of Utah. Actually, I think she only lost 2 matches. And one of them was going from Florida, going to the high altitude. And Lisa Raymond, I saw her lose a college match. But with that, you know, I don't think it's unfair sometimes to call it celebrity coaching, but it's like Djokovic paid, help me out, the top Polish player, feedback. So, you know, I was told, I don't know if it's accurate, he's paying him $25,000 to go to a couple majors. Oh, that's just funny money for those big-time winners. And they said, why did you hire feedback to be with you? Because feedback coached Lendl, and Lendl started coaching Murray. And Djokovic, who spent more money on tennis coaching than anyone, said, through feedback, I want to find out what Lendl is telling Murray. I've got a book. The title of it is The Man Who Made Murray. It's really a biography on Lendl. But yeah, so being around Martina, I mean, obviously she knows a lot about tennis. But I really think, and going back to Billie Jean King, if Martina Navratilova, and I know at your place there was a court that was built back when she was working with Estep, right?
Yeah, Estep and Carden. I think Craig Carden at the time. Yeah.
So there's a court at your place. So with that, if Billie Jean King were to walk in and watch your Tennis for Tots classes, that's what they need to see, is how are little kids being taught? And that is what's missing, you know, with the bottom of the triangle. You know, I do think that the GreatBase, I wish we had named it Solid Fundamentals or Straight Tennis Information. You know, you GreatBase, I'm GreatBase. You know, it just comes from Richard Hernandez saying young kids tennis needs a GreatBase initiative. Here's a flashback for me from this. So I'm at the Vic Braden Tennis College, and I was doing VIP lessons, you know, a very important person. And I mean, Vic wouldn't want to hear that because to Vic, you know, the small guy, never forget the small guy. Everybody's important. But David Hartman, my mother used to love this TV show, Good Morning America. And, you know, people thought of him as a pro baseball player. He was good enough to be offered a scholarship at Duke, but he played in a TV series. So everybody thought that he was a good baseball player. But he was a good athlete. So I'm teaching him and his wife, his 2 kids, the 4 of them. So I see Vic, and he's asking me how the lessons going. You know, Vic was always running around with a camera, getting aerial. They're doing this and that, and I said, the guy loves golf. I remember telling my mother the story. She's just, you know, being from small town and hadn't been in tennis that long, and I said, I'm hanging out with David Hartman, and you know. But I was, you know, never really wowed by that, but I was wowed by this. Because I've met all sorts of celebrities. But I was wowed by is Vic says, oh, okay. So he starts filming and gets giddy, and they stop everything. They film this guy's golf swing. And I called my mother up. I said, yeah, it's going to be on Good Morning America. So it's just like, it was like the next Monday. So it was Gerald Ford was president at the time. So there's Jack Nicklaus's swing, the president, Gerald Ford, and then David Hartman. And it's just gold. You know, those 2 helped each other out so much. I know when we had Getting Aerial on our podcast, Brandon Flanagan was helping me with the interview, and he was just blown away. Because, you know, Brandon has a degree in sports science, and he has his own gym. But, yeah, so that was Vic. That was Vic. I've got some notes on Nancy Lieberman. Why don't you talk about that first?
Well, I mean, you know, I knew of Nancy Lieberman long before I had the privilege of meeting her a few years back. Phenomenal athlete, trailblazer, to say the least. And I think had a major influence on turning Martina Navratilova around. I could tell in the little bit of time I shook hands and spoke with her, and we had a couple of mutual friends, and she's a winner. And she's... you're going to know exactly what's on her mind. And, you know, I wish I would have had more time to quiz her and ask some questions, but it was only about 15, 20-minute period. But yeah, I think it's incredible. I'm glad they hit on it during the documentary because it was a non-tennis player having a huge impact on what was to be one of the greatest tennis players, male or female, to ever play our game.
With Martina, super fit, she preceded Lendl, and Lendl was unbelievable with fitness. Pete Sampras, Robbie Seguzo, I know he went there. It's like, whoa, I got to get away from this place. But Pete Sampras said it had a major impact on his career. Lawson Duncan, I one time was doing a clinic for coaches up in North Carolina in the mountains, and Lawson Duncan, I met him, I was with the Davis Cup team in Hamburg, Germany, so I thought he was kind of aloof and shy, but I thought he was aloof, but then I found out, no, he's the nicest guy, down to earth, shy. So, because he was a hitting partner with the Davis Cup team. But he had a huge forehand, huge kick serve. Lendl was smarter than smart. He played him, seriously, he played 5 sets in the morning, best of 5 sets, and he's returning his kick serve and playing everything to this guy's forehand because he had such a great forehand. But yeah, I do think it's kind of like a Rocky scene, where they show, Rocky making his comeback in the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. So they showed a lot of cross training, but I think with Nancy Lieberman, I say this all the time, 2 types of New Yorkers, Hicks and Slicks. When I went off to SUNY school, State University of New York, and you're an upstate New York kid, and you meet people from the city, it's like, whoa. When you're an upstate New York kid, it's a little bit different than if you're you're from the country of Wisconsin, is you're meeting these city slickers. So the upstate were the Hicks, and then the city people are the Slicks. But it's in Malcolm Gladwell's book, how you talk to people. Like the Korean pilot won't tell the co-pilot won't tell the head pilot, hey, they just won't say, hey, wait a minute. But I remember teaching tennis. One of the toughest jobs ever was teaching tennis in the Hamptons. And it was under Andy Brandy, and I was in charge of the camp. He was the overall director, and we had no problem between Memorial Day and when school ended, so a month. So then schools are out end of June, and all these New Yorkers come out from Manhattan. And we went from having 4 courts back on the bay where people were coming in by boat, by seaplane, and I had to run this camp. It was right across the street from the ocean on 2 hard courts, because the New Yorkers they won out. They were members. But she was a basketball player. She's in all sorts of Hall of Fame. Back in the day, AAU basketball, played at Old Dominion, won championships, broke records, All-American. But I have told so many kids that they should play basketball. It's inexpensive. I've told them too, play basketball, but don't shoot. Play basketball, but don't be in any games. Just play defense. I can ramble forever. Under Vic, I gave Artis Gilmore lessons. He's like 7'4", told me he couldn't hit down. Braden loved basketball. That was his favorite sport. There's a scene where Vic is dunking basketballs. Artis Gilmore's dunking, Vic dunks, Artis Gilmore dunks, Vic dunks. And the camera fades away and Vic's on a trampoline. But there was a gym, and during the day when I was at Braden's, they were training one of Gideon's, Schlesinger. I have to go back. R.E. Schlesinger, if I have it right. They were training the U.S. Olympic basketball team. So, but I remember Tim Gullickson. He came in several times, and Tim Gullickson took a leadership role with this, because there's a couple guys on the staff that played. One played high school. If you're in your starting 5 on a high school team, you're a pretty good basketball player. But there was another guy on the staff that played college basketball. So I had key to Vic's library. And it's like, no, I'm not playing basketball. I'm in here looking at old film and doing this and doing that. But I remember they were playing these guys 5-on-5, and it was all about winning. So they're having a meeting beforehand. So they don't have a 5th guy. So I become their 5th guy. And I just tell this guy, I got it. I said, I got it. I said, all I need to do is stay between the man and the basket. And it's kind of like, you got to know what chewing, the coaches used to tell you, PE classes, you got to know what type of chewing gum, what flavor gum they're chewing. And then when you're diving on the floor for balls, and you get the ball, and you don't dribble, you don't shoot. You just play defense. And you look at the footwork. If we have kids do it all the time, nose to nose, go out there. Okay, you're on offense, you're on defense, and just move. Watch basketball on TV, just close your eyes, and you can just hear the sound of the court. But I do think with Nancy Lieberman, the work ethic, people need to watch it. They show weights, they show sprints, they show a row in a boat, the plyometrics, the track. It's just big time. Kids aren't doing that now. I don't think they're doing that. I've told so many. I've told so many kids. I think a lot of my work is I'm a supplemental coach. Coaches send me their players, and I ask these kids, "Do you have a fitness coach?" And they go, "Yeah." I go, "Your fitness coach might be the best in the world, but you need to fire your fitness coach. We just timed you for a mile. You just ran a 7:45 mile, and you got a fitness coach." But with and Nancy was in the documentary said, tennis training it was lagging, it was behind. I just got a couple more things. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think that. I think that was such a pivotal point because. I loved the tennis back then, but the culture it isn't like some of the other sports, and I think that the introduction of Lieberman into Martina's life there brought a toughness that only comes from some of the other sports, and because and that was back then. That's why now I tell parents this all the time too. Your kid doesn't, they can sign up and do rec sports of any sort in this day and time that don't require a ton of practice time. And, they have games and they compete on a team and do all that, but it's not like they have to make it their primary sport, but boy, get involved with other sports, and stay in them as long as you can. And even like you were just saying, Steve, it can be as simple, parents, typically, we don't need a ton of help on forehands, backhands, and things like that. But get out in the backyard and get a couple of baseball gloves and throw a football, shoot, put a basketball hoop up. That kind of stuff is invaluable from an athletic development standpoint. And I think Martina was already an athlete, but I think that the mentality from the other sports that Lieberman brought, I think, was critical.
Well, it's like your comment, what's tennis need? The theme, go back to the future. I was up in, let me say this first. Well, I'll say it second. So I'm up in Canada, and there's this kid, Austin. And I go, 30 seconds for water. And if there was one, there's 25 of these kids, maybe 30. And I'm telling you, every time this kid get water and he'd run back. He'd be the first guy there. I've told that story like 5 times since I got back here. So, people, they've been around our program. We got girls visiting here many, many times now over. And I said the next day, because the rate of forgetting is very scary. The rate of learning is slow. So I said, everybody back in here. I said, tell me the story of Austin. And this one kid says, Austin Krajicek. I said, no. And I said, Austin with the water break. But even that, this is coaching. So he would run over and he'd be hugging the racket and ready to listen to me. And I said, well, it's going to take everybody else 3 or 4 minutes to get back here. What are you going to do? You're going to stand there idle? So even though this kid's like a superstar, running back, hustling, I said, you're here. How's it go? You can't soar like an eagle if you're hanging out with turkeys. Well, the turkeys are over there chit-chatting, and we're going to tell you yell to them 3 times to get over here. But I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you shadow swing your serve, go in, 1, 2, 3 split, volley overhead, and why don't you just work on your game until they all get back over here? But this is something about Austin Krajicek. You got to take your hat off to Austin Krajicek. So this is pretty big. He's playing with Rajiv Ram, who I've had nothing to do with, but I fed some balls to him when he was 14 and watched him win the 14 and unders. I know he was coached by Tiley. He was coached by I coached Tiley for a long time. I guess you guys were students at the time, so I can't say we coached him. But anyway, he played doubles with Austin, played doubles with Clausen. But Rob Krajicek always says about Austin, so, here's a guy, Austin's mother was a professional water skier. Dad played 3 sports, played 1 college. He's a referee where he's bumping, kicking Bobby Knight out of the game, a famous coach. And he said to me, he goes, I don't think my kid's ever had a nosebleed because he was, he played tennis. with, I tell Indian people all the time, there's so many gracious Indian parents that we meet. I said, your tribe, people heard me say this before, your tribe, you're too intelligent to have your kid wear a helmet. Because if you're wearing a helmet, something bad's going to happen. But back to basketball, Marty Reeson was in the loop coaching Everett and Naratilova as a Fed Cup captain. Three times he was in the NCAA finals. He won 9 majors. People wouldn't even know Marty. I know he has an autobiography. I mean, there's just so many things you can find out with people from the past. But yeah, 2 men's doubles, 7 mixed. He won 6 of 7 with Margaret Court. But he had a great run where he was like number 10 in the world, and he was like 37 years old. So I think Marty Reeson, that's a story with, I'm always telling people, don't get on that track to have your kid be a teenage sensation. Have your kid be a late bloomer. This is one thing I want to talk about is Andrea Jaeger, though.
Yeah.
So at 13, she wins the Orange Bowl. She becomes number 2 in the world. I got this down. She was in the semifinals of the Aussie, finals of the French, finals of Wimbledon. And I think she was twice semifinals in the U.S. Open. I mean, that's a great player. Her dad was a boxer, like Agassi's father was a boxer. Connor's uncle was a boxer. That mentality, boom, I'm going to move my feet. Now, Roland Jaeger, he got a kick out of meeting a lot of tennis techers who did internships with Mr. Hoffman. Or Mr. Hoffman passed away, I think, 84. But so tennis tech started in 81 through Andy and Joe Brandy. Mr. Hoffman was hiring summer coaches, and then there was even some winter internships. But Naratilova beat her in the 1983 Wimbledon final, 6-0, 6-3. And Jaeger was so good. But when she was younger, she just really won with that, that mental toughness, that one-dimensional tennis. And then Jaeger, as good as she was, she came up, there was money in the game, so she didn't play doubles like Everett played doubles. But yeah, I just think that net versus baseline. Let me ask you this question. With Martina, or just tennis, I do this drill all the time. We just feed the ball up, people play a swinging forehand volley and play it out. And they love it, They have quite a few advanced players at Richmond Hill. Actually amazing how many kids can play, solid tennis. It's great to go up there. It's my 34th year where they've had the same director. Now, you've been the player development director for about the same length of time. I know you went up there with me. Yeah. Do you think that the volley is just, I know we say it's a lost art. I know that I went to the Spanish program a few times, and they, Federer was their model, and Nadal was their idol, their hero. And that was one point, this was many years ago now, but they were critical of the Fed. They say in the Fed, and they had the numbers to back it up, that he was better off to move through the volley as a conventional volley and get in versus play a swing volley. But why don't you just comment on swing volley versus conventional volley?
Yeah, I think one of the first times I remember seeing somebody work on it was at Timber Creek, and you were having Lissa Kimmel feeding her some balls. She was actually already in net position, though, so you were kind of working more on that in terms of a retreat for a lob over the backhand a little bit, and then it evolved from there. But the reality of it is, I think that we see it. I think there's a deficiency in the midcourt. I think there's the Leighton Hewitt disease, so to speak, but it's times 1,000. And, the approach shot's lost. The approach shots are being hit with players, like you said, they're moving way left around backhands that are just hanging in the middle of the court. So I think that there's, the point of origin for it goes deeper than just swing volley versus a conventional volley. But, I think there's so many factors, whether it's an inside ball, outside ball, where the opponent is. I think there's time and a place for everything situational. But, if you have a flaw in your volley, the further back you go from the net, that flaw is going to be more and more exposed. So I think that there are many players playing the game at a pretty decent level that are flawed midcourt in general, and I think that for many of them they just have a lot more faith in it. But the time that's allowed, I think there's a time and a place where it does make sense, but I think it's just way overused. And the worst part is it's not followed up even. They'll play a swing volley and then really still not follow it into what we call good volley position. So it's out there.
When I was up in Toronto, wind this thing down, but Hubert Crash, he credits you. He was playing a money tournament that you were running, and he changed his game. He met you, and you did some film work, and I know I worked with him afterwards, but I spent a lot of time with him as a tennis teaching pro, both in Canada and the U.S. and Japan. Anyway, with Hubert, he was telling me I taught him to hit a high backhand. Ideally what you want to do is have an overhead. Vic Braden, 75% rule. When you're up at the net, 75% of that net, you're going to hit an overhead. But if they get it over to the 25%, they get it over your backhand side. If it's out in front, especially with all these two-handers today, you play a high swinging backhand. Mm-hmm. If it goes over your head, goes way back, it becomes an emergency shot. You always want to choose the shot where you have the longest hitting zone and the most racket hit speed. But Hubert, he credits for you. A few things. I had him talk to the juniors. He was a national champion in the 18 singles and doubles. When I was in Toronto, ITFs, idiots traveling foolishly. So a couple of really good players that I've worked with, they're in Toronto, they're healthy, and they didn't play the nationals. The 18 nationals are in Toronto. You're here. You're healthy. And that you didn't play. Jimmy Connors always play where the pressure is. And I'm going, I just can't believe that. So Hubert, he's talking to these kids and he goes, well, I made the Davis Cup team. He didn't really, he was on the team. He wasn't playing matches. He goes to Japan. He was the highest ranked player in Japan who wasn't playing the ATP circuit. He played a lot of tennis. He was number one in the 35s and 45s in the ITFs. Just great passion. But you need to be able to play it all. But if you're watching somebody and they're, that's one great thing about Coco Gauff. Okay, she has a very extreme grip in the ready position. You can see that. But she can play doubles, and she plays a very conventional volley. I think someone could tell her, if you set that up when you wait with your volley grip and you've got $50 million in the bank or more, and the ball goes, it's a really weak serve and it's a green light point. Let's see you start doing what players from yesteryear could do, and she's got the athleticism to do it. But you have to train that way. You have to drill that way, and you have to develop the instincts to go forward. That high backhand when Rod Laver, he was on the Wheaties commercial. That's the shot that he was hitting. We cover the emergency shots. Yeah. I've been at the U.S. Open a few times, other tournaments with Matt Clore. He's a tennis junkie, like you and me, and anybody who's listening to this podcast. So. He's right with Federer because he's on the court and he's practicing with Mackenzie McDonald. I said, I'll catch up with you. So I end up watching some of it. So the ball is a great story. It was the kind of thing Martina could do with ease. So ball goes over his head. Maybe not as good as the Fed, but amazing player, Naratilova. So ball goes over Fed's head. He hits a high one-handed backhand, cross-court, drop shot. And there's thousands of people. There's more people watching him play than watching the matches, watching him practice. And he kind of looks around like, did anybody see that? Did anybody see that? But Billie Jean King, 39 majors, Margaret Court, 64. I think it's 59. Here's a Martina story for everybody. I certainly had some holes in my game. I started off being told to use one grip. And Braden used to always say, if a coach is really in great shape, they're probably not a great coach. Maybe that's because Vic used to like donuts. But, I can remember going out to Vic with dinner, and he said, Steve, let's just get 2 desserts. And it's like, yeah, okay. But so Vic, at his place, a girl from Korea, I have some fun with this. And I say, well, my best win was against a D. Lee or L. Ducky from Korea. She was top 30 in the world. Or no, I blew it. Top 30 in the world. Of course, it was only in practice, but never, didn't lose. But as the legend grows, played her twice. But anyway, then the punchline is she was tough. She was tough. But I remember battling with her on the back courts at Braden's. She wasn't there very much because she was traveling, but when she'd be there, and we were so busy during the day, but we'd say something, a couple times in the evening or whatever, and get together and play with her. But I remember when I played her, Navratilova beat her in like 42 minutes. She's a top 30 player in the world, but Navratilova could just take a player, and that's really a compliment to Everett. With Jaeger was so good. I think Martina, certainly, on the forehand side, could have been a little bit more on the eastern side, and got the racket face a little more closed. If she, on the backhand side, a little bit, a little more Guillermo Vilas. Really lifting Wawrinka, hitting heavier top on the backhand. But I really think, the juniors, especially parents, should watch it. There's only so much time in the day, but if juniors were to watch it, I do think at one point, Tommy Paul was doing that. He was going back and watching old film. Watching like a Tim Henman or the Australian who's almost as good looking as me, Patrick Rafter.
Yeah, Rafter.
And I think it's just to wrap it up here, the documentary. Yeah, my mother is very nostalgic. I love to go back in time, and I don't think that in general society goes so fast, life goes so fast, as I don't think people are reflective enough.
100%.
I've been at the Battle of Boca. I just, you and I going down there and running Seguzo Bassett and then Chrissie taking it over. And it's just like, well, what would have happened if we stayed there and she was in charge, but we were running it. But I can remember being at the Battle of Boca. And granted, like all of us, she's trying to cover up from the sun. She's watching, watching some matches. And people don't even know she's there. Granted, when she's on TV, she's in the booth and, front and center. And it's like, Chris Evert. It's so good. So good. Appreciation from the past. Yeah, let's wrap it up. Go ahead.
Let me say one thing for the parents, the kids, coaches. I think that there's snippets in the documentary showing different periods of time, and I think if you just look at the evolution of players adapting their games and changing their games to improve, and just watch Navratilova serve, or get on YouTube and go through different 3-4 year periods and just see how that serve evolved. And one point it actually got worse. Novak, who got kind of misguided on information, I think at one point, but you see it in different stages, the serve, and I think it's just critical that people understand these guys are seeking any way they can to get better. And so when coaches tell, a player, when we as coaches tell a player or a parent that we really suggest this adjustment in a game to keep going forward, I think it needs to be, the pill needs to be swallowed a lot easier. It's amazing the amount of negotiation that has to take place these days to get people to do little things that, I always tell people, I don't wake up in the morning to get somebody worse, in the sense of taking their game to a lesser place long term. But a person like Martina, she was looking for they both were, but I think of her really more so. They're just looking for every edge. And boy, is it illustrated in the serve in that documentary.
No, thanks. Tennis teaching conferences, when you said that about Novak, Nick Bollettieri was once asked, why do you keep working, Nick? Why are you still at this conference? And he said, well, I can answer that one word: alimony. So, you got to love Nick. He's married 8 times, 7 women. One woman married him twice. If you read his autobiography, he was on his way to his own wedding, didn't go, and married another woman by the next Monday. But I was one time listening to Todd Martin. He went straight to the top.
Yeah.
Welby Van Horn used to compliment him as that would be a prototype player to copy. You know, he never won a major, but he was right there. You know, he'll tell you that he was pretty close. He got a little tight at Wimbledon. You know, class act. But more power to Novak. That's where it didn't work. You know, whatever they worked on at that time, it didn't work. But at least he was open. He was searching with trying to get better. And that's really what this podcast is all about. Hopefully we share some things where we look at that documentary. I mean, there is the relationship side. You know, we always say coaching is a relationship. It's a chemistry. It's a magic. Teaching is information transfer. I do think that now there's so much money in tennis. In addition, like Andy Fitzgerald spent quite a bit of time on the tour now. I'm surprised that someone hasn't figured out that, okay, we can hire a former player to be part of the team, but we're going to bring in someone who really knows tennis math, and really show you how to hit the ball better. You know, the tennis math. Okay, last thing I'll say is this is always repetitive, but self-management, stroke production, strategy, stats, and score. But the numbers from stroke production, with Navratilova. Okay, so we can go through the math for the grip on the volley. Let's just go with the numbers. But here's a number that people don't think about is, I just made a match for watching two boys. I coached them when they were younger, one longer than the other, but they both made it to the SEC. It's a pretty high level. And, they didn't stay the course. They were taught to play a different way, and now it's, playing back, blasting forehands. But here's a number, like say with Chris Evert. I always used to tell people, if you watch her play and she hits 20 ground strokes in one volley, you don't remember the one volley. Everett came to the net, just like Borg. Everett came to the net so much more, but she was just labeled a baseliner. Oh, she's just a baseliner. Yeah. No way was she just a baseliner. And where Navratilova, it's like McEnroe said about Borg. He taught me how to stay in a rally. He taught me how to defend. No, I appreciate your time, Dave, as always. I appreciate the listeners. Yeah. I hope with our podcast that people, there's so many podcasts. You consider yourself a podcaster, Anderson?
Not really, no.
No, I'm not really a podcaster, so if we were, we'd have some commercial breaks. We'd have some sponsors.
Yeah.
That's one thing, though. The GreatBase, the podcast, the content is all free. And I guess the business side of it is if people got way to the end of this podcast. Yeah, we've always asked people, hey, be part of our roster and give us $10 a month. But we're on the horizon. We got to do some things. We have to reach more people. The old Lombardi, be brilliant with basics. Navratilova and Everett, there's lots of things they were brilliant at.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Anderson, crew.
Okay.
Listeners, thank you very much. Adios, amigos.
All right.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Good night.